His name was Love. I was talking to my mother about him, lying to her. She didn't want me talking to him anymore, said it wasn't love, but sin and abomination. Tried to convince me that I was confused, sick, maybe not physically, but spiritually, that God and Jesus had a plan for me that involved a beautiful wife and adorable children. "You're not gay, are you, son? Not really," she kept repeating. "You're not really gay, DJ." And I was so tired of arguing with her. She ripped away the glow-in-the-dark stars from my bedroom ceiling, leaving me alone in the dark. My wall of art, my beloved drawings and paintings, she'd torn away and thrown in the trash. She even shattered my CDs, broke my cell phone in half, and took the door off of its hinges. If I were to continue, would her ire turn to me? Would I myself be what she ripped apart next? My father had already raised his fist at me. Then he turned away crying, saying that I was no longer his son. If I continued fighting, there was no telling what sort of physical harm I would suffer. So I told her that I wouldn't see Love anymore. Even said that I didn't really think I was gay. Promised even. I didn't have much of a choice. But in the back of my mind, I knew that I would make no such effort. I couldn't stay away from him. He was the love of my life. I belonged to him, and him to me. It felt as if my very heart beat for him, and him alone. We were a bit like Romeo and Juliet. Our parents, although they smiled at one another at church every Sunday, absolutely loathed each other. My mother would talk such shit about his mom behind her back, and then hug her when she saw her, and his mother did the very same thing to mine. They both shared the same opinion, that the other wasn't a real Christian. Being Southern Baptists, gossiping, and being judgmental was a staple of their personalities like sweet tea and NASCAR was to our culture. But in truth, I don't think either of them were good Christians, because neither of them ever acted like Jesus. Love was his name, and my beautiful boy was mute. He couldn't speak at all, but he could write the most beautiful, soul-stirring poetry, and the most fantastical stories. I could have happily drowned within his art. When he let me draw him, or paint him, beautifully and truly nude, he could be so silent, so still. He would just stare at a tree or a bush beneath the moonlight in the woods, sitting on a boulder next to a babbling creek, his blue eyes glimmering. Sometimes I had the urge to check and see if he were still breathing. We had met in high school when we were seniors. There weren't any accommodations for someone like him, so he tended to suffer a lot. He was the only one that knew sign language, so his usual communication involved writing things onto paper, and the teachers did so on the boards in front of the class more often for him. But it wasn't easy. None of the other students tried to speak to him. In fact, they tended to stare at him and whisper among one another as he walked by them in the halls between classes. I could see the sorrow in his eyes as they did so, and it broke my heart. Just like I did when they ostracized me, he mostly kept to himself. We were fellow pariahs, it seemed. In fact, it was because he was having so much trouble that I decided to introduce myself, if only to help him with his schoolwork, and maybe, I thought, I'd make a friend. He seemed to be detrimentally shy, after all, and I'd been friendless for most of my high school career. In a way, we needed one another. One day, I felt brave, and so I sat down in front of him at a mostly empty table in the cafeteria during lunch. The dull roar of the other students' conversations faded into the background as our eyes met for the first time. We both smiled and blushed a little before softly laughing and awkwardly, shyly looking away. His name was Love, and he had short, spiky dark hair with the back and side shaved. He dressed in all black, and his body was toned with muscular arms and the shadow of abs on his delicious stomach. His piercings were an eyebrow ring, and his ears, which included multiple cartilage rings and silver daggers dangling from his lobes. With ivory skin, soft, kissable lips, perfectly framed by neatly trimmed scruff, and deep, bright cerulean eyes, he was breathtakingly, staggeringly beautiful. Getting to know one another, we discovered a shared love for Edgar Allan Poe and Evanescence, and we started spending the weekends together, Saturdays at my house and Sundays at his, We'd play video games, listen to music, write, draw, walk around the moonlit woods, and hold another as we slept soundly within each other's arms. His name was Love, and Love rolled his own clove cigarettes, rode a black moped to school he named Shelley after the author of Frankenstein, hung out in cemeteries and loved to explore supposedly haunted, abandoned buildings, wore black leather jackets and listened to music that scared our simple, shallow classmates, even had a beautiful cross around his neck despite idolizing Lucifer for being the first advocate for equal rights and Lilith for being the first feminist, and even after all that said he loved Jesus because of his endless, boundless love for humanity. He was deep, far deeper than anyone ever had the chance to experience, except for me. We were each other's first, and we had slowly, tenderly learned to please one another within the moonlight, beneath the protective blanket of the night. Usually, one of us would make love to the other until we were both satisfied. Then we would simply switch places and go again. Sometimes we would end up making love all night long. In every way, he was my dream guy, my dream lover. It felt as if I had been manifesting him since my lonely 9th grade year, which was full of bullying and isolation. My dark prince was finally coming to save me, to sweep me off my feet and take me away from that homophobic redneck town, and we would live happily ever after. At least, that's what I had hoped. We talked about going off to a university together, roommates in our shared gothic dorm room. We talked about me becoming an artist and him an author and a poet, and us collaborating on multiple magical projects together. We talked about traveling the world and exposing ourselves to other cultures. We talked about getting married one day and adopting a daughter. And we talked about moving to London and growing old together. And I truly believed that all of those plans were going to unfold perfectly, like a slowly blooming black rose. He had just begun teaching me sign language. I'd only learned a few signs so far, but my favorite was his name, Love. It involved crossing both of one's hands and fists over the chest as if giving oneself a loving hug, and that's what it felt like every time I thought of him. Despite my passion for learning his physical way of speaking, he preferred to communicate with me through his writing. He wrote me love poems almost every day, some quite steamy, actually. His adoration and desire for me had not waned, even though we were about to graduate. It had been almost an entire year, though it felt like nothing more than a few weeks' time, and it seemed we still had our whole lives to look forward to. I was happy. He was happy. Something neither of us thought we could ever be before we met on that fateful day. We had truly changed each other's lives for the better. After the heartbreaking fights with my parents, I found myself facing an early Saturday morning alone. My sleepless night of drowning in my tears had given way to twilight. Black and gray clouds ominously covered the skies above, blocking out any light that may have shone through. Though the rain had not yet begun to fall, fog strangled my sickeningly suburban neighborhood, as it had been all week long, and I still felt so sick, so exhausted, so dreamless. I stepped outside and walked aimlessly through that fog. At the side of my house, I leaned against that cold brick wall, softly, silently crying, and my mind was still replaying the events over and over again, hurting me that much more, ripping the stitches of those fresh, bloody wounds. The night prior was when it happened. He had come over to my house after school, as usual, but my older sister had come home from college for the weekend to surprise us. She opened my bedroom door unannounced, catching us in a passionate tussle, kissing and touching on the top bunk of my bunk bed. She just stood there, staring, as Love and I froze in fright, him on top of me, my legs wrapped around him. Though we were fully clothed, we felt so exposed, and from the look in her green eyes, I could tell that my sister did as well. Blinking, she swallowed nervously and slowly eased back out of the door. She then quietly closed it behind her, leaving us alone with our growing anxiety. Of course, she told my parents, and a screaming match ensued. Daddy drove my beloved boy back to his house, while my mother set me down and began to repeat Leviticus 20:13 to me over and over and over and over and over again as I wept, down on my knees before her, begging her to stop. If a man lies with a male, as with a woman, both of them have committed an abomination. They shall surely be put to death. Their blood is upon them. That damned passage was burned into my very soul. Blinking, I found myself back at that dreary Saturday morning, staring down at the dewy grass between my toes. I was still in my pajamas from the night before, and they still smelled like him. Musk, leather, tobacco. No, that scent wasn't just on my clothes, it was in the air itself. Love was there. Stepping out from behind the house, he smirked and tilted his head. Tears were filling his ocean eyes, but they weren't falling yet. I rushed into his arms and we tasted one another yet again, but this wasn't just any kiss. In fact, it was unlike any we had ever shared before. It had a spark to it that only star-crossed lovers could create. Bittersweet, but hot as hell. It just made me want more. I told him the truth about my mother and what she made me promise her. I told him that I was in love with him, and that I wanted to run away with him, that I had to be with him no matter what. And I asked him to meet me in the woods at our usual spot at 3:00 a.m. He kissed me once more, but did not nod or shake his head as he usually did when I asked him a question. Arching his brows, he looked at me, drinking me in, switching his gaze between my eyes, back and forth. It was then that his tears began to fall down his pale cheeks. Without an answer, he turned around and began to walk away. I felt a panic rising within me. Was this goodbye? Was he giving up? Had his parents given him the same orders? About to cry, I asked him to wait. My beautiful boy stopped in his tracks. Taking a deep, shaky breath, he looked up to the churning storm clouds above. Turning his head to the side so that he could look back at me from the corners of his eyes, he grew still. Slowly parting his lips as if to speak, his jaw began to tremble. I love you, he perfectly said, crystalline tears streaming down his beautiful face. His dulcet, euphonious voice was deep, gruff, husky, mature, and masculine. Each word perfectly pronounced and enunciated, his articulation mesmerizing. I have loved you more than the trees love the rain. I have loved you more than the stars love the night. I have loved you in 1,000 lifetimes, and I will love you in 1,000 more. As he spoke, he signed every word as well. I was shocked. Love, I managed, stepping toward him. You spoke. He then turned back to fully look at me, and with a cocky smirk and a sparkle in his blue eyes, he replied verbally, signing at the same time. Yeah, you have always had a strange way of making my mouth move. He then slowly faded away into the fog, vanished into the ether, as if he were never really there in the first place, somehow abandoning me, leaving me to haunt this plane of existence alone. I thought I was dreaming, or perhaps hallucinating due to the stress, but it wasn't until hours later, when his distraught and inconsolable mother called, did I finally learn the truth. In the dark and lonely night, my beloved had taken his own life. He had blamed himself for what had happened when my sister caught us. On top of that, his own parents were accosting him, just like mine were me. He just couldn't take it, my sweet, sensitive lover. He just couldn't take it. And so, he left me to wander the earth, aching, wailing out into the fog, calling out for my soulmate like a broken banshee for the rest of my miserable existence. Love was his name, and he left me loveless.